And our next presenter is Dr. Catherine McGlynn. Dr. Cathy McGlynn is the Aquatics Invasive Species Coordinator, as it says on the screen, for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Her job is to implement the New York State Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan. She oversees the statewide Watercraft Inspection Steward Program and several large-scale hydrilla control projects. She received her PhD from the Department of Ecology and Evolution at SUNY Stony Brook. Her specialty is invasive ecology. And she's going to take it away.
Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, good. So good morning, everybody, and thanks very much for the invite to your symposium. Today, I'll be focusing on slightly off topic regarding the symposium overall topic, but focusing on the aquatic invasive species in Owasco Lake and present and future. So overview of the presentation. I'm just going to talk about some confirmed aquatic invasive plants and animals, some incoming species, and what you can do. I just had changed that slide because it wasn't updated, what you can do to help in the situation. So I had scanned the IMAP invasives database to see what was lurking in Owasco and found that you have a number of aquatic plants that are invasive, including Eurasian water milfoil as well and algae, starry stonewort. So I'll just briefly go over those, which you probably are all familiar with, but I'm putting it out there anyway. So Eurasian water milfoil, native to Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Main stem with leaves that have fine leaflets with a feathery appearance, and the leaves have blunt tips, and it spreads mostly by fragmentation, which is a huge issue for us because we have a number of folks who like to harvest this plant, and that's not generally the appropriate control measure. If you want to manage for that and you're clearing paths to an access point, that's fine. But other than that, you're not going to get much satisfaction or control out of harvesting Eurasian water milfoil. Next one on the list, briefly going through that, starry stonewort, which is a large algae that has been transported to the US via ballast water. Also needed to mention that Eurasian water milfoil was brought in as an ornamental to the US originally. So this starry stonewort is also native to Europe and West Asia, and it has whorls of leaves. And I think of a whorl as essentially a wagon wheel. So there's the middle stem, which is where the axle attaches, and then the spokes, which are the different branchlets or leaves. So this particular plant has 4 to 6 long branchlets and can grow over 6 feet tall. It sort of creates these pillows of vegetation at the bottom of the lake, and it is anchored by colorless filaments, and its reproductive structure is a very tiny star-shaped bulbul. And we know that this particular species is underreported throughout New York because it's easily mistaken for other algae. So that's something to keep in mind, but it is reported in Owasco Lake. Also noting for these plants, so you've seen that both, well, not just plants, but plants and algae, you've seen that the stonewort and Eurasian water milfoil, as well as curly-leaf pondweed and a host of other plants that we're seeing infesting our waterways seem to be from Europe and Western Asia. And that's because the climate, in the past, the climate has been very similar in our areas relative to Europe and Western Asia. As climate change continues to move forward, that those suite of species that can inhabit New York waters will change. As waters get warmer, other species can overwinter, and we'll be seeing more species from Africa and South America. So next slide, let's see. All right, so I just wanted to put in a plug for Dave's group. There is a Great Lakes Starry Stonewort Collaborative. I highly encourage folks to get on board with signing up for their presentations, yay Dave, yes, and learning more about the species and helping to do monitoring and identification and helping us to figure out where everything is located. There has been a researcher out of the Bronx Botanical Garden, Robin Slife, who's done some modeling, and based on his surveys regarding what inland water bodies are suitable for this plant, sorry, not plant, algae, doesn't have a vascular system, but what's suitable for this particular algae. So that's a great place to start, but we really need on the water data. And I know that David has also been working closely with other folks at the Great Lakes to figure out what's the best BMP for controlling, because that's a huge issue for a lot of folks in Minnesota and Wisconsin as well. So I will leave that up to you if you want to participate in that, but I just wanted to put in a plug for that. So next slide, let's see. Okay. So I just wanted to briefly talk about some potential new arrivals and put them on your radar. So I'm sure that you've heard about hydrilla. It's a major problem in Cayuga Lake. It's at not only in the Ithaca region, but also in Lansing, King Ferry, and Aurora. And we are monitoring the situation and hoping that other boaters do not spread it to other locations, because it's new. The original infestation was in southern Cayuga, but it has spread, and it's generally found in marinas and boat access points. That's a very strong correlation. So we know that it's being spread by boats and trailers, and we really need to be aware of that and keep that in mind when we're moving from lake to lake, that we need to clean, drain, and dry. So that's my other plug. So the other species I wanted to talk about was water hyacinth and water lettuce, both of which are from South America and Africa, and they are up and coming in terms of overwintering in New York. They are two of the go-to aquatic plants for aquatic gardeners, unfortunately. So this may be an uphill battle for us, but we're starting it. So I encourage folks to find alternatives for these species, and I'm going to give a little more information on each of these three species right now. So hydrilla, native to Korea. It is a federally listed noxious weed. It is prohibited in New York. We have more than 20 infestations found in New York, ranging from under an acre in contained ponds and lakes to the Croton River, which is a tributary of the Hudson River. You know what that means, as well as some ponds that are connected to major waterways by creeks. So we have Spencer Pond, which is connected to the upper Susquehanna by Little Nanticoke Creek, as well as Green and Hickory Lake, which are found in the Buffalo area, which are connected to Lake Erie by the Smoke Creek. And the Green and Hickory Lake are the most recent infestations that we found. So we talked about whorls of leaves. Remember, we have the wagon wheel. So this particular plant generally has 3 or more leaves with serrated edges and a midrib. Often hard to see the serrations on the leaves with the naked eye. So if you think you have it, just send us photos and make sure they're quite magnified. I also want to say that the general rule that I've been telling folks is that if you have more than 3 leaves on a plant that looks like this, let someone know, because it may not be hydrilla, but it could be Brazilian elodea. There is some variation in the number of leaves per whorl for native elodea, which look quite similar to this, but I would much rather get a false report and have people looking out for this than not know about it. So please let me know. I really appreciate that. So one of the game changers for this species is that not only does it produce turions, which are the overwintering buds in the leaf axils that can basically be deposited at the bottom of a lake or carried by currents to other locations. A lot of other aquatic plants have turions, like curly leaf pondweed, but the tubers are the big game changer. No other aquatic invasive we're dealing with right now has tubers, which you see in the bottom portion of this slide. So they're essentially food storage structures that nestle into the bottom of lakes and rivers, and they overwinter, and then they sprout up into new plants when the temperature of the water exceeds about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's usually toward June or July, depending on the location. So it takes us a long time to, how do I put it, diminish or reduce these tuber banks, because tubers can remain viable between 5 and 10 years. So each treatment that we do, we generally do herbicide treatments, because this plant fragments as well. So we cannot do any harvesting. So we do herbicide treatments, and we do them for multiple seasons. And the intention is to knock back tubers and turions, and we monitor the density of these structures to make sure that the numbers are being reduced. Okay, next species, water hyacinth, native to South America, go-to for aquatic gardeners. We have some recurring populations being reported in Western New York. It has these lovely round to oval shiny green leaves with inflated petioles and spikes of light purple colored flowers. And I have the redundant item that I wanted to relieve there, so I'll remove it. So they're very pretty plants, really easy to grow, which makes them big favorites of aquatic gardeners. But please, please, I encourage you to find alternatives. And we now have an aquatic gardener's guide through DEC that you can make use of to look up those alternatives. So I encourage you to look into that. I'll provide information for that in a few slides. And here's water lettuce, also native to South America and Africa, has a free floating plant that resembles an open head of lettuce. Leaves are light green with parallel veins and short white hairs. It does have scattered populations reported throughout New York, and it's documented as overwintering in Wisconsin. So on to the animals we go. Okay, some confirmed aquatic animals, which our previous speaker mentioned, zebra mussel, and we have fishhook water flea in Owasco Lake. So zebra mussel is native to Caucasus or Black Sea region of Western Asia, first documented in Lake St. Clair in the Great Lakes in 1988, brought here by ballast water. They have microscopic veligers, which means that any containers with water and water-containing compartments in boats can potentially transport these microscopic veligers to other locations. So that's why clean, drain, and dry is put in place. They are filter feeders, and they can filter up to 1 liter per day, which means they will increase the water clarity of your water body, which people think is wonderful, but it's really not. So that will encourage more growth of aquatic invasive plants and other plants, which will also increase the amount of nutrients being released into the water when those plants die back. Zebra mussels do prefer hard substrates, and they often are outcompeted by the quagga mussels, which were also mentioned, which can live in deeper, cooler areas. And their females produce more than 1 million eggs per year. So you can see how this is going. Once you have zebra mussels in a small area, there's very little you can do but contain them. In some cases, they will essentially eat themselves out of house and home, and the numbers will be reduced as resources disappear and their population numbers may crash. But it's hard to know case by case if that will occur in your particular location. Fishhook water fleas, native to Eastern Europe and Western Asia. They were also ballast water introduction. They eat smaller zooplankton, and they may impact young of the year fish, and they compete with those young of the year fish as well. They will also accumulate on fishing lines and cake them up, and that can be quite problematic for folks who attend to fish. And we're still trying to figure out what kind of impacts they have on the food chain overall in lakes where they've become established. So that's a TBD. Some potential new arrivals and putting on your radar: bloody red shrimp and round goby, which have been found in a number of areas, found in Lake Ontario, and have been moving through the canal to the Mohawk River, and they've been moving east of Utica, and they've been currently being tracked by USGS. So let's move on. Oops, slow. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay, so more information about bloody red shrimp. They are Great Lakes, located right now, again, ballast water. They're about ½ inch long. They have translucent bodies with bright red orange heads and tails, with eyes with large extended stalks. The eyes are quite large and black. They have a tail that's square with 2 spines at each end, which probably isn't something that folks would focus on. They do avoid direct sunlight. They are known to swarm, and they generally swarm after dark. So that's also something to keep a lookout for if you happen to be out after sundown. Round gobies, native to Western Asia area, again, Black and Caspian seas, introduced through ballast water. They are bottom-dwelling fish. They grow up to 10 inches in length, and they prey on native fish and native invertebrates. They are voracious. And I will say that my key to identifying them, I consider them the chipmunk of the fish world because they have very chubby cheeks. But we are tracking them through USGS as well as through DEC's fisheries annual surveys. So we are tracking their movement as they're heading toward the Hudson River, unfortunately. So just briefly mentioning pathways for introduction, which will be very appropriate for the remaining section of my talk. We have some pathways that I'm listing here, but the main understanding for me is knowing these pathways means that we can take preventive measures to prevent introductions. And as you see on the curve, the invasion curve, if you can prevent introduction or eradicate soon after using early detection and rapid response, you're in a very good place. But again, it depends on how much surveying and monitoring and how much outreach and awareness there are to keep people in the know so these things can be reported and taken care of. So I'm just going to make you aware of these pathways and what you can do to help, as well as what those pathways look like in more detail. So focusing on that prevention, boats and bait, we have Watercraft Inspection Steward Program, which you probably are very familiar with. We have over 200 locations that are currently covered across the state by stewards who do voluntary inspections and in some cases decon. They are there to educate the public and assess how well the public understands the situation, and if the public is taking preventive measures on their own, the stewards are basically assigned to provide the boaters with a protocol for doing inspections and walk them through it, because we understand that there is no way that we can cover 7,000 lakes, streams, and rivers in New York with stewards. So we're going to need to rely on boaters and watercraft users of all sorts to be very responsible and make sure that they clean, drain, and dry no matter where they are. If there's no steward present, we still need folks to do that. So that's very important. It's a very important part of this, our efforts to address these issues. We have bait disposal requirements as well, requiring people to dump bait on shore in garbage cans or return the bait to the place it came from, or dispose of water if you've already used the bait, dispose of water on the ground. Again, that could be harboring villagers. We don't want that to be spread to another lake. Focusing on prevention, releases. We have a number of situations where we're providing education and outreach to aquarium owners, because we have had infestations documented that were started from people dumping their aquarium. So essentially, you buy a fish, it outgrows the aquarium. What do you do with it? You don't take it back to the store. Instead, you put it in a ditch, or you put it in a local pond or lake with all of the plants. They'll just basically turn the aquarium upside down and dump everything into the water. So we'll end up with, reports of northern snakehead, or have hydrilla in small ponds in the middle of a small town, because someone has been able to purchase hydrilla or Brazilian elodea, unfortunately, online, and then they've put it in the water. So we are now dealing with these issues. So we're trying to educate folks about that. We also have certain cases where there are ceremonial releases of these animals that are bought from live markets and other places where they're for sale. And these releases take place in order to gain merit and to provide freedom for these animals. Unfortunately, a lot of the animals that are released into environments that are not habitable for them. We're finding that they eventually not even eventually, they very quickly die because they don't overwinter. Many of the species have been from Southeastern Asia. And when released into a lake in, April or October, they don't stand a chance in terms of water temperature of being able to become established and reproduced right now, but it is still an issue. One example I'll give you quickly is we had a recent release by garbage bag of hundreds of gangetic eels into the lake at Prospect Park. And this is an issue. We had this reported to us. We are making an effort to develop education outreach materials and working with communities in the metro area to address that. So we will keep you posted on that. As far as live markets go, we're still working through how to deal with that. We have some tip strips regarding purchase and sale of particular species, but we still need to up our game regarding that issue. Aquatic gardens are also a source of invasives. You see here two of the very beautiful plants that are invasive in New York. We have the yellow flag iris and the lovely water lily, which are not native to these areas. So we're working with reaching out to nurseries, plant clubs, and shows. We have the Aquatic Gardener's Guide now, which provides good tips for people, and we will continue to do that outreach and spread the word. Just making a note as I go to the next slide, some tips for your aquatic gardening is make sure you keep your aquatic gardens away from areas that could potentially be in flood zones if there were a storm event. And if you have something is invasive, you want to keep it in jail. If you maybe have a container with a lotus, essentially the Lumbo nucifera, which is the Asian lotus. If you have that plant and you really want it, put it in a container upland, and that would help quite a lot. Okay, so what you can do as a New York State resident to help us, because this is a battle that requires an enormous amount of people and energy and focus and a lot of investment. So folks need to have a sense that they too are fosters of the environment. They are stewards of the environment, and their actions have consequences not just for themselves, but for others who like to use natural resources, as well as the inhabitants of those natural habitats. So what you can do, here are some tips. Clean, drain, and dry your watercraft and fishing gear no matter where you are. Don't rely on the steward. If there's no steward there, please do that. Keep up to date about what aquatic invasive species are problematic in your region and your lake. I recommend checking out IMAP Invasives. I'm happy to provide more information about that. Learn to identify aquatic invasive species and report them, which you can do through IMAP Invasives. You can also reach out to my office. or me and let me know if you find something suspicious. I'm happy to help. All right. Learn which plants are recommended for aquatic gardens. We have the gardener's guide available. Don't dump your aquarium and its inhabitants into public or private waters. Just please don't. Call your local pet store, ask if you can rehome. And unfortunately, if that's not a possibility, please do what you need to do and then dispose of these plants and animals. Be aware that aquatic plant purchases can have hitchhikers. We have a number of reports where hydrilla has been found in plant material that's been shipped to people from online purchases for aquatic plants. And that's a big problem. I also want to mention, because I don't have the slide in this presentation, what I also want to mention for you is this past week, we've been running crazy trying to deal with a nationwide issue of algal plant balls being sold for aquariums across the country, which were tainted with zebra mussels. There's been a corporate national recall of the item, but there are still mom and pop shops and smaller non-corporate stores we're trying to figure out how to deal with. We're also trying to figure out how to make recommendations for folks who have purchased these. So I'm recommending for now that if you have a small aquarium and you have one of these algae balls in there, please dispose of the algae ball in the trash. For larger aquariums, we'll be providing more recommendations, but for now, that's what I recommend. I'll be meeting with Fish and Wildlife on Monday to discuss more about this and how to provide recommendations for general aquarium owners. So more information coming. Okay, you want to engage in or manage your AIS whenever possible. Again, I know that can be challenging. If you need information, that's what we're here for. We can provide you with BMPs. We can also, as Dave is also part of this, the Finger Lakes Prison, we have partnerships for regional invasive species management across the state who can act as resources to assist you. So please use those resources. Also recommending conducting lake-wide regular surveys of plants just to see what's going on. It's nice to have a baseline to see if things are changing. And as you're seeing nutrient changes, as our first speakers had talked about, I would definitely recommend doing that. Developing a lake management plan if you don't have one, and spreading the word. So I'm just going to whip through these slides. We have resources that you can make use of. We have invasive species regulations. We have how to prevent the spread of aquatic invasives, which is clean, drain, dry protocol. We have a basic overview of our AIS boat steward program and where they're located. There's an interactive mapper on that page. We have resources for aquarium and pet owners available now, as well as a general list of AIS in New York if you want to learn more. And I also recommend going to our New York State Invasive Species Clearinghouse, which is quite useful too. So I know that I'm probably run over a bit, but thank you very much for your time and attention today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions in the time that's left.
Thank you, Cathy. I have some few questions here. That's a new one to me. What are the giant blob plants that my neighbor calls sea boogers? They are everywhere.
I think they might want to send me photos before I do anything like any attempt at identification. And I recommend making the photo on a white background and put in something for scale so I understand how large that plant is.
Okay, good. Is it coincidental that HABs have formed in the same locations where hydrilla is chemically killed off on Cayuga Lake? Are you seeing the dead hydrilla as a nutrient feeder to HABs?
So my response to that is actually all of the hydrilla treatments are done early in the season before there's too much biomass that develops, because it takes too much chemical and it's way too much energy to try to beat back a hydrilla infestation 3 months into the growing season. So the treatments for hydrilla and cayuga tend to occur in June and July when the plants are very small and just above the bottom of the lake, maybe 2 or 3 inches at most. So that's when most of the treatment occurs. That's when it's most effective, because they're also, as they're growing, they're taking the herbicide into the plant and then it goes into the root system. So my response is, I don't know that there's a whole lot of dying biomass that's in Cayuga Lake at this point during those treatments or right after those treatments.
Okay, thanks. What international laws are currently available to control ballast water?
Oh boy, that's a nest of hornets. There is a VITA there's been huge arguments about who gets control over who regulates ballast water between the states and federal government. We're still working that out. It has been designated to, from my understanding, EPA and US Coast Guard are now responsible for that, but states do have the ability to chime in as well. So we're still working through our state responses to some changes in the VITA, the Vessel Incident Discharge Act information. So that's an ongoing process. And if you want to learn more, again, contact me and I will basically inundate you with lots of publications and governmental links to look through.
Okay, a couple more questions. Where should you empty an aquarium?
Okay, so my response to that would be, you're going to have to be humane about it, but if you cannot rehome your animals, you're going to have to dispose of them in the trash after you've taken care of them. And I would also recommend doing that with the plants as well. You can dump the water on the ground and that would be fine. For the case of the algae balls, we are recommending people who have small aquariums, please, put your animals in a different location and disinfect your aquarium, because there's going to be veligers throughout the gravel and in various other locations. So I know that can be a bit challenging, but you think it's not being humane, but it's humane to the native ecosystems that will be impacted if you release those animals.
Two more questions. Can dried plants and mussels rehydrate and regrow on returning to a lake?
That's a really good question. I don't have a definitive answer to that. It depends on how long they've been dried, the plants themselves. So we're still working on those issues. There's a lot of research that's being conducted on viability. As far as zebra mussels, the general rule of thumb right now is dry your boat in the sun for 5 days at average humidity in the summertime, so warm temps, or 3 days at sub-freezing temps should take care of the zebra mussels. So that's what I would say regarding that.
Okay. Last question. Since you oversee the watercraft inspection steward program, we've had stewards at the north end of our lake. Are we going to have some at the south end? And are you needing volunteers and or people, or particularly young people, to apply for that summer program?
Okay, I'd have to check the long list of locations to see, but I know that for your lake, you would probably, I believe you work with the Finger Lake Prism.
Yes,
They
usually.
have a water steward program that we fund.
Okay.
So we would need to touch base with them regarding other locations. For most of the cases that we have stewards at our DEC launches, there are some municipal collaborations because otherwise we would have no access point to a water body. So we can certainly talk through that. If you would like to volunteer, I think that's great. There is going to be training that's conducted by the Finger Lakes Watershed Inspection Steward Program fairly soon. They are currently recruiting for paid positions, and they have a post on their website for that. So the recruitment is going on right now, and they're hoping to get that done fairly soon because they'll have to have people in place by early May.
Okay. Quickly, one more question. Can aquariums be directly composted into personal gardens similar to macrophytes?
I would say yes, actually. Yeah.
Right.
As long as it's not in an area that's close to a waterway.
Okay, thank you very much, Cathy.
Thank you.
And we'll press on to